Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, there they are. All right, it is so good to have everyone here tonight, or this afternoon. Thank you for coming back. And I know you are like me. We are excited to hear what Dr. Nunnally has to share with us again this afternoon. And didn't he bring a great and powerful word this morning? Amen. So we want to get right into it at this time. So we want to go ahead and invite Dr. Nunnally to the platform. So if you would you give him a hand clap of welcome once again? Thank you, Pastor Bob. Oh, you got the mic.
Okay, how about that? For all of you who are senior citizens like me, you get by with a little help from your PA system, right? It's the first thing to go. Thank you all for coming out on an unusual time of day and for a special meeting. And I trust that the Lord's going to help us and is going to help me. He's going to help you as well, because what we're going to try to do is cover a little bit over 100 years of turbulent history in just about 45 minutes. All right, so what that means is I'm going to try not to, and I want to encourage you not to get bogged down into detail. What I'm going to ask you to do is get big picture. Big picture. You don't have to worry nearly so much about dates or about specific names, especially hard to pronounce Middle Eastern names and that kind of thing. Because that's not what we're here for. What we're trying to do today is to paint for you, and on my end, a very accurate picture, accurate in terms of dates and locations and people involved and events and stuff like that, because we want to be accurate. But for you, it's big picture and not detail. So what we want you to do is to equip you, inform you and equip you to be able to think through what's going on in the current crisis, current war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and give you a bigger perspective in which to place this event so that it's understood in light of the whole, and you're not trying to look at the reality of the world through a keyhole. Perspective is everything. So let's get going. You're looking at Africa, Middle East, and Europe. And what you see here, and I'll just use the middle map, this little tiny point of red in the middle, that's Israel. That'll tell you a little bit about the land masses surrounding Israel and its relative size in comparison. To put it in another perspective, and I tried to center this right over the holy land of Missouri, okay, is the land of Israel is in yellow here. And that's Israel in comparison to the United States. It's about the size of New Jersey in terms of square miles. This is a close-up of Israel with its closest neighbors. And because we're going to be talking a lot about Israel proper, quote unquote, and Gaza Strip, quote unquote, and West Bank, quote unquote, then I'd like for you to have a mental image in your mind so that we're just not speaking words into the air that don't matter, okay? So Egypt is to Israel's south, Jordan is to Israel's direct east, Syria is to the northeast of Israel, and Lebanon is directly to the north. All of this blue here is Mediterranean Sea. Israel has a beautiful shoreline, by the way. And we were staying, this is letter G right here, is Tel Aviv. We were staying right up at about letter F, right on the Mediterranean, about 20 miles to the north of Tel Aviv, when we were there during the war. And I guess maybe this would be as good a time as any other to just share a couple of points with you about the current war. Is that all right if we take a commercial break right now? So we arrived in Israel on October the 7th. And that morning, we got there about 9:30. At about 6:30, the rockets started to be shot from the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is this little green and yellow strip right here on the southwest corner of Israel. We got there at 9:30. Rockets started at 6:30, so we were 3 hours into a shooting war when we landed. We didn't know it. We weren't told it on the airplane, and I think for reasons of security, they didn't want people, upset and, clamoring about, I want to keep going, I want to turn around, I want to go somewhere like Istanbul or whatever, and it would have just been weird. So nobody said anything. Got into the airport, nobody said anything. We saw a couple of signs that were leaned up against chairs down on the floor that said bomb shelter this way, and Lacey and I both looked at each other after the second sign that said the same thing, and we said, oh, they must be having safety drills. Stupid American. And so we only found out that we had flown into a war when we were talking to the taxi driver as we were headed from Tel Aviv to Netanya, and she said, over 2,500 rockets have been shot out of Gaza by Hamas in the last 3 hours. And we were just amazed. Well, one of the neat things that this collaboration between the United States and the State of Israel is a development of a defensive system called the Iron Dome, or in modern Hebrew called Kupat HaBarzel. Kipat HaBarzel. The word kippah, it means that little skull cap that sometimes you hear called a yarmulke, which is Yiddish, but the Hebrew is kippah. So the kippah, the dome of iron, was a gift by the United States to the State of Israel, which they then turned around and greatly improved. It provides a defense system over Israel so that rockets and missiles can't be shot in. The Iron Dome intercepts about 93, I would argue that the percentage is higher, 93% of anything that comes in aerial against Israel. So of the overwhelming majority of the rockets, now it's over 9,500 rockets that have been shot from Gaza. In addition to those are rockets that are being shot from southern Lebanon by another Islamist group called Hezbollah, and also by Islamic Jihad, and then by Iranian-backed groups in Syria, which is northeast of the Sea of Galilee, right here in blue. Probably somewhere close to 1,000 rockets in the last 40 plus days. A difficult situation. That's why I referred to it this morning as the time of Jacob's trouble. That's a biblical phrase. Feel free to look it up and do some study on that on your own time. That'll be homework. Does that sound fair? Since I'm a professor, I'm allowed to do that. There's a union card. It's all legal. Totally legal. Won't cost you an extra shekel. And so we spent the next better than a week in the land of Israel. We thought that we were going to have two groups coming in, because usually when there's a flare-up like this, it is beaten down pretty quickly and it goes away as quickly as it came. So we're still thinking, maybe naively so, there's still about 3 days before our first group comes in and almost 2 weeks before our second group comes in. So certainly the second group will be able to make it in. All those flights were canceled and neither one of those groups ended up showing up. So while we were there, we were in Netanya, which was a wonderful place. Again, up here by like letter F and Ish. And it was a great place to be because it was far enough away from the Gaza Strip, about 55 miles, and far enough away from Hezbollah shooting from Lebanon all the way down here, that we were sort of in a safe zone. We probably didn't get more than about, 20 or 30 rockets that made it to Netanya the whole time. but then none of them made it to the ground because the Iron Dome intercepted them. When the Iron Dome would intercept, you knew it immediately because you heard this big, it sounded like a sonic, you've heard a sonic boom before? It sounded like a sonic boom, and then the ground shook and the building shook and the windows and doors made of glass rattled. And the first time that happened was the first night that we got there. We just finished dinner in their privately constructed sukkah, tabernacle, because it was the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. And very quickly, the hotel staff began scurrying around, and they shooed us down to the bomb shelter that was in the deepest of the underground kind of basement area, which interestingly was an area that was shared with the synagogue of the hotel. And also interestingly, it was the end of the Feast of Sukkot and the beginning of another festival that's called Simchat Torah, which is rejoicing in the law. It's the time when the law of Moses has been read in its entirety, in Hebrew, in the synagogue, during service, in a yearly cycle that completes the reading of Genesis through Deuteronomy. And it's the beginning of the next cycle that does the same thing again. So every year, the Torah, or the law of Moses, is read in its entirety, in public, in synagogue service. So a synagogue service was going on, and they had the scrolls of the Torah and the prophets, and they were holding those, and they were singing songs, and they were chanting prayers, and this was the final service to conclude that series of holidays associated with the Feast of Sukkot. And we all jammed in there, people from the staff of the hotel, and people who were handicapped, and very young children, the elderly, people in wheelchairs and on walkers, and everybody was jammed down in there together. And that's the way that we finished Sukkot and Simchat Torah for that year. It only lasted for about 35 minutes or so, and then people began trickling out of the bomb shelter / synagogue and on up into the upper floors. Each day, things seemed to get more and more intense. And so by Wednesday, we heard over the news that a worldwide jihad, or war against Jews and Christians, had been called for by the leadership of Hamas. And so we thought, by then we knew that the groups weren't coming, and we knew that we needed to begin making our way home. In a series of just crazy coincidences, finding things in our phone that we didn't know where they came from or how they got there, we were able to get in touch with our Senator Josh Hawley's office, and they were incredibly encouraging and helpful, even sometimes calling in the middle of the night to pray with us. Is that cool? That is really cool. And then also another oddity was we found this number that we called and got in touch with a guy from India who helped us for about 3.5 hours and on into the wee hours of Wednesday night and early Thursday morning. And he was able to find us tickets. All of the American carriers, American Airlines, United Airlines, Delta Airlines, they had canceled all of their flights. I think it was a problem with the pilots union. They didn't want to fly in to an active shooting war. So, which is understandable, but it left us with very few options for getting home. Our tickets were for the end of the month. We were supposed to come home on October the 31st, Halloween. And this was right around October the 11th. So we had to get new tickets that were exorbitant in price. Thank you very much, guys, for your help in getting those paid for. But we were able to talk to this gentleman from India. And you've ever talked to people from India on the telephone? Yeah, okay. So we don't know whether this is legitimate or not. He ends up selling us this first leg of our flight home with Bluebird Airlines, which we couldn't really even find on the internet. Come to find out, they own a total of 4, not 40, not 404 jets. And so they puddle hopped us from Israel to the island of Cyprus, 100 miles away. And from Cyprus, we flew backward to Qatar. And Qatar is the number 2 supporter of Hamas, right behind our friends from Iran. And so we flew to Qatar, 7-hour layover, 15-hour nonstop flight to Chicago, and we're able to hand off these folks who had come to help us to their families who had driven from Cincinnati to Chicago. A few hours later, we end up landing in Springfield, and there are just scores of people waiting there with welcome home and homemade "We Support Israel" signs and Israeli flags and balloons and stuff like that. And we just felt so loved and received and affirmed. And so thank you guys also for your prayers and for your support for us through that situation. On a couple of occasions during our trip back, I looked at my wife and she looked at me, and one of us would say to the other one, "You know, we could turn around and go back. It's not too late. It's not too late." We left dear and precious friends behind, and we have stayed in constant daily connection with them by text and WhatsApp. You know WhatsApp. And by telephone calls. Just talked to our kind of Israeli godfather yesterday on the phone twice, and loving on him, wishing him a Shabbat of Shalom, and asking about their welfare and how they were doing, if they felt safe. They live near Jerusalem, and everything is good, and things are going well. But what brought us to this point? What is it that brought us to this point? This is either a one-off and then, this is just weird and this is an exception to the rule, or this is a part of a larger continuum, and that's what we want to address tonight, or today. So, Gaza Strip, the West Bank. Why is it called the West Bank? Because in 1949, Jordan, who had attacked Israel with all these surrounding neighbors in what is called the War of Independence, 1948-49, they conquered this area and they kept it. And then they illegally annexed Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, Israel's eastern neighbor, illegally annexed the West Bank in 1950. So questions about two-state solution and independence of the West Bank, etc., it was never given to Jordan. It was illegally occupied and then illegally annexed. And then finally in 1988, they gave it back. They basically said, we renounce all territorial claims to every square inch of the West Bank. So it's kind of no man's land in some respects in terms of international law. But we'll talk about that more in the coming moments. Here's another picture of the same. I don't know how helpful it is, but it kind of shows contour. And you see West Bank. You see where Tel Aviv is, right? You see this? You can see Haifa, the major port of Israel, all the way up in the north. Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, West Bank inside of the yellow line. And then this is a picture of, and I know this goes way back, but this goes back to pre-World War I. Think about the 1918, 1919, and the Ottoman Empire. You've heard this before, guys, like in school and on the news and stuff. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire is an empire that was created by the Turks in what is today called Turkey. Turkey now is in this light purple here. But they had created an empire that stretched all the way to almost to the Caspian Sea, all the way to the Persian Gulf. It engulfed all of northern Africa, all the way over to Morocco and Tunisia over here. It included all of this area that is Bulgaria and a part of lots of Greece. It was a gigantic empire, and it controlled Israel, the land we call Israel today, longer than the Romans did. I mean, this is a long-lasting really gigantic empire. And so Israel, as we call it today, was just a part of this greater empire called the Ottoman Empire, ruled by Ottoman Turks. And the Ottoman Turks made a big mistake. In World War I, they allied with the Germans. And when the Germans and the Ottoman Turks lost, then the Ottoman Turks lost their empire. So in Israel, 1920 and before, Israel is under the rule, what we call Israel. There was no Israel, but what we call Israel today was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. And it was called not Palestine. There was no name Palestine. That had died with the Romans, okay? They were calling it Syria Palestina, and they were calling it Palestina. Talked about that this morning. This, under the Ottoman Empire, it was called the Sanjak of Jerusalem, the Sanjak of Nablus, and the Sanjak of Akka, or Akko, up near Haifa. And so the idea of Palestinians, there were no Palestinians. There was no Palestine, all the way up into and to the end of World War I. At this time, and this is pre-State of Israel, this is prior to the Second World War, the Holocaust, prior to anything that was called Zionism, and Jews and Arabs were already fighting in the land of Israel. I wonder why. It wasn't about, well, we don't want the state of Israel here. It had absolutely nothing to do with colonial or imperial designs of the West. This was under Ottoman rule. The West was not ruling. There was no state of Israel. There was no Zionist movement at this time. So all of these reasons today that are being given, well, it's because of imperialist Zion, colonialist Zion, it's because of, Israel's territorial expansionism, et cetera, et cetera. It's because of, the existence of a Jewish state, et cetera, et cetera. The problems between Jews and Arabs go back before all of that. Are we clear? This is just a point of history. By the way, I didn't create any of this. You can find all this stuff on the internet. Everything that I'm going to tell you, almost everything. Okay, so now World War I is over, and the Germans and the Ottomans lose. So what happens? This part of the country gets divided up between Britain and France, the Allied powers from the West. And so in Lebanon and in Syria, this is under the French. It's called the French Mandate. The French Mandate. Then there's the British Mandate that includes Egypt and what we call today Israel and what we call today the modern day Kingdom of Jordan. All of this. The British Mandate. So the British Mandate period starts on paper in 1920, but in reality in 1923, and in Israel it continues the British mandate to control, to rule over, to administrate basically as a protectorate the land of what we call today the land of Israel and the Kingdom of Jordan. Now, the original plan under the British was that Jews would be given this western part of the British Mandate, and Arabs would be given this eastern part of the British Mandate. That was the first plan. Arabs and Arab leaders rejected that plan. They wouldn't accept it. So we're going to take a look at about a half a dozen different plans on how to partition the Middle East. That word is a kind of a code word, partition, to divide up, right? All right. So the first plan was a Jewish land of Israel on the west side of this Jordan River and an Arab land on the east side of the Jordan River. And it was to be called, by the way, Transjordan. And that was the original name of what today is called the modern-day Kingdom of Jordan. That's plan number one, and that was rejected by Arab leaders because. And you need to hold that because in abeyance and see if you can figure it out after we've looked at a few other plans. So Israel, or the land of Israel, is under British rule, and it comes to be called by the British, by the English Parliament. It's called Palestine. They've revived the old Roman Latin name for the land of Israel. That is a sort of a later perversion of the word Philistine, okay, that was started by the Romans. All the citizens back then were called Palestinians. All of them, including Jews. How do we know this? I have personal friends that I've been working with for at least 15 years, and they have the ID cards of their grandparents, and their grandparents, there's a green ID card, and it says it gives their name, it gives their religion, it's Judaism, and it gives their nationality Palestinian. These are Jewish Palestinians. Are we getting confused already? This is a very confusing and interesting world that you've dived into. All right? Jewish and Arab immigration, Jews are pouring in, trying to get away from rising anti-Semitism in the Western and Eastern Europe. And there's all kinds of Arab immigration coming in because there's lots of jobs to be had, building railroads, and there's rise in tourism and that kind of thing at the time, and so there's lots of opportunity. So lots of Arabs are pouring in, lots of Jews are pouring in, and Arabs constantly, this entire time of what is called the British Mandate, were advocating, they were lobbying the British the British occupation to disallow Jewish immigration. They didn't want any more Jews coming into the land. Never mind that they were being pogromed in Russia, and they were being persecuted in places in Eastern Europe, the like. And Arabs and Jews began, because of this issue of, sort of fighting over the same territory, the fighting continues. Again, this is not because of Israel having its own sovereign state. It didn't exist yet. So we can't say that the animosity is going on because the state of Israel exists. It predates that in terms of its beginning. That didn't work, so a second British solution was proposed by what is called the Peel Commission, 1937. We are in basically almost right at the doorstep of World War II now. It was suggested that Jews be given this area in the yellow, and it comprised about 20% of the land, and that Arabs be given 80% of the land in the south, with a gray belt that was supposed to be an international zone that included basically Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and then an outlet to the sea. This was rejected by Arabs, and the reason that they gave is, no, it's all our land, and we're not willing to give up 1 inch of it to these Jewish immigrants. So again, there's, acceptance on the Jewish side of the plan, rejection by the Arabs. Again, there is no modern state of Israel, and all these things that are, Western imperialism and colonialism and all this stuff that's being complained about on college campuses, university campuses today is not happening. That hasn't even, those aren't even possibilities. No one's arguing about these things because they don't exist at this time. All right, the next plan was the next year because the Peel Commission plan failed. And so there is a third British plan. It's called the Woodhead Commission proposal. And here, Jews actually get even less than the Peel Commission. Instead of 20%, their percent in the north, this little area in yellow, is 18%, and the Arabs were going to get 82%. It was rejected by Arabs who said, no, we want all 100% of the land. Not only the land of Jordan, that's going to be an Arab, an Islamic country, but we want this part. And you've got to be asking yourself, remember the fill in the blank question that I left unanswered that you're working on? Are you beginning to get a feel for what's going on? Is a theme developing here? I'm hoping that you see it, but we're not done yet. A fourth, called the Anglo-American Plan. This was basically DOA even before it got off the ground. 1945, and this is at the end of World War II. And the Americans were brought in by the British, who were out of money, and they wanted the support from the United States. And they were going to set aside, again, north for Jews, south for Arabs, with the gray strip as an international zone comprised of Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and an outlet to the sea. There was more here that was going to be ceded to Judaism, but it was because everybody knew by this time about the Holocaust, and they knew about that there were lots of Jewish people who had survived the Holocaust who would need a homeland, had been displaced. When they went back home, they were still being persecuted by largely the same people that were persecuting them before and during the war. So the rise in anti-Semitism, ladies and gentlemen, the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, these are warning signs. And if they are not countered, they will increase. The only way that we are able to have a legitimate place to stand in the future is if we stand on the right side of history now. All right. So the Anglo-American plan was rejected by both sides. But if you have four proposals that have failed, then the only thing that you can do is come up with a fifth, right? By this time, the League of Nations has become the United Nations. The abbreviation is UN, which most people think means unnecessary. But that's another issue for another day. At any rate, the partition plan of the UN was going to give basically a 50-50 split. Jews were going to get 50%, 56%. Arabs were going to get 43%. The Jews accepted this. The Arabs, again, rejected. And there was even more escalated fighting because people were beginning to get wind that the British were about to withdraw. They were about to leave. The mandate period was about to officially end. Okay? So in 1947, the drawdown was taking place. 1948, it was complete, and the last British soldier got on the boat to go home. And about the same time, Israel declared its independence as an independent modern state. The modern state of Israel was born on May the 14th, 1948. And immediately, these neighbors, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, as well as indigenous Arabs within the land of Israel, went to war with the modern state of Israel. And this war is called the War of Independence, and it lasted for 2 years. There was an armistice that ended it, kind of like a peace accord or almost like a peace treaty, but not quite. And this put onto paper and formalized what are called today still the pre-67 borders. And we'll talk about 67 in a minute. But when you hear about Israel needs to return to its pre-67 borders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that was an armistice. It was not a peace accord. It wasn't a peace treaty. But it was basically a ceasefire agreement, glorified ceasefire agreement, in which the lines for the pre-67 Israel were created. Now, this event creates the Gaza Strip, which was taken over and controlled by Egypt. It was never annexed into Egypt proper. In fact, it was called a protectorate by Egypt. They never gave the people in the Gaza Strip citizenship or passports or whatever. And so Egypt became, quote, the protector of the Gaza Strip, but never really developed it very much. The West Bank, as we mentioned earlier, was taken by the Kingdom of Jordan on the east. And so because it's west of the Jordan River, which is supposed to be the boundary between Jordan and Israel, this is a bulge over on the west side of the Jordan River. And for that reason, it's called the West Bank. It's west of the Jordan River. It was annexed in 1950 illegally by the modern Kingdom of Jordan, and then unceremoniously given back, or basically abandoned in 1988 when Jordan said, "We are not going to press our claims any longer. We relinquish all territorial claims to the West Bank." That was King Hussein of Jordan, who is now deceased, and his son Abdullah II reigns in his place. All right, and so that's, War of Independence. The next event that takes place that is of importance is in 1964, and that is the formation of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was declared a terrorist group, and it was formed, of all places, on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus ascended into heaven. I mean, just down the road from the Chapel of the Ascension on the Mount of Olives. The primary goal of the PLO, as stated in their charter, is the destruction of the modern state of Israel. So that's kind of where their head's at. Question would be, why? What is it that motivated all of those rejections of all of those partition plans? What is it that, in 1964 is behind the creation of an internal terrorist organization whose almost sole purpose was to destroy the modern state of Israel? Keep that unanswered as yet. Fill in the blank question. Keep that in mind. The next major event is the Six-Day War, which happens in 1967. Pop quiz, how long did the Six-Day War last? Actually 7 days, but 6 sounds better in Hebrew. Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim. It just kind of flows almost like like poetry. And so 6 days sounded better. And so it was called the Six-Day War. It was actually 7. So Egypt, Jordan, and Syria attack Israel again. And Israel takes from Egypt the Gaza Strip. Remember that Egypt had taken it basically illegally during the War of Independence. The West Bank was also taken over by Israel, and Jordan never regained control and finally renounced any claims on it in 88. And then also Israel took from Syria what is called the Golan Heights. It's called Golan Heights because in the Bible it's called Golan and sometimes Bashan. I think that those two are synonymous. Golan, Bashan. And then heights, because it goes way up in elevation. When we go there, you have to have your hat, your coat, your gloves on, even in the springtime, in the early fall, because it's windy up there, and because the elevation, it's cold. There's snow up there, lots of parts of the winter, and Syria had used the Golan Heights to shell Galilee and the area around the Sea of Galilee ever since the War of Independence all the way to the War of 1967. Israel pushed them back off the Golan Heights, and so far that their artillery couldn't reach Israeli settlements any longer, and so Israel maintained control of that. It was annexed by Israel in the early 80s, and only a couple of countries, I think Pakistan maybe, and the United States under Trump recognized that as a legal, legitimate annexation because it was taken in war. The rule of law, international law, is that if territory is taken in a defensive action against an aggressor nation that attacks you, then it may be retained until such time as a legitimate, legally recognized peace treaty has been signed and agreed to by both sides, then the territory is to go back. It's never happened with Syria. There's never been anything more than a ceasefire, not a peace treaty signed. So almost immediately, the Knesset decided that it wanted to return the Sinai to Egypt and return the Golan to Syria in return for peace. Both of them declined, both Egypt and Syria. All right? Those are just some interesting pieces of the geographical and political pie that we're still dealing with. Here's the international law. Okay, the Yom Kippur War. We're now advancing and getting closer to the current day, 1973. Yom Kippur War. What national holiday or observance was going on when the Yom Kippur War broke out? It's one of those 6-day war things. It's who's buried in Grant's tomb. What color was General Lee's old gray mare? Yeah, this is Yom Kippur, right? So Yom Kippur, it means Day of Atonement in Hebrew. The primary aggressors are Egypt and Syria. They're the main bullies on the local block. But look at all the other, and this is not a exhaustive list. Look at all of the other Arab countries, all of the other Muslim countries that piled on, supplying troops, that supplied military hardware, that supplied money, that supplied tactical support, like shipping and that kind of thing, moving arms around and soldiers around and stuff like that, all over the place. And Israel, this is in the days of Golda Meir. There's a new movie called Golda. Yeah? Young folks, you want to get caught up on some history before your day? Watch the movie, the video Golda, about Golda Meir. And it was at this point that we were this close to nuclear war. Golda called the President of the United States, and she said, "I'm standing on the balcony." That was code for, I'm about to hit the button. And the United States says, "No, don't do that. We'll break our arms embargo and we'll send you the military hardware that you need to beat back the enemy." The United States did, and Israel did. There were no territorial changes, though. The borders didn't move. Everything went back. Although Israel in 1973 went all the way to Damascus. They were right on the outskirts of Damascus. So never mind Golan Heights. They had basically taken the whole shooting match all the way to the capital city of the modern nation of Syria. And they gave it all back and retreated back to the borders of the Golan Heights as it existed at the end of the 67 6-day war, which was really 7-day war, right? Okay, 1978. Recognize any faces? Okay. Menachem Begin, which we call Menachem Begin. It's required in American English to mispronounce every Hebrew word. Just keep that in mind. Then Jimmy Carter, our president at the time, and Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt. And this is the first peace that takes place between the modern state of Israel and any other Arab or predominantly Muslim country. So this is a major breakthrough. Young people, we call this Camp David, the Camp David Accord, 1978. And in return for that peace, Israel returned all of the Sinai, which, by the way, is not a part of biblical Israel anyway. Biblical Israel goes all the way to Beersheba. The Bible talks about from Dan to Beersheba, and Beersheba is the dividing line. It's still a modern Israeli city today. On some of our trips, we visit the ancient Tel, or the artificial mound with archaeology of the ancient site going all the way back to the days of Abraham when he dug a well there. And we from time to time will take groups there to study. All right, 1987 to 1993. This is called the First Intifada. The word intifada is an Arabic word. It means uprising. The first Arab uprising of people living within the borders of Israel, fighting against Israel. There were claims of economic and social oppression, and this kind of got the ball rolling to what we call Oslo I, the Oslo Accords. So we got to fast forward then to Oslo, but before, remember, 1988 happens and Jordan relinquishes control over the territorial claims over the West Bank. So now we get to Oslo I. This is 1993, and you may recognize some of these folks as well. This is Bill Clinton, our president at the time. This is King Hussein of Jordan, and this is the prime minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, who will be assassinated 2 years later in 1995 for making peace with Jordan. And so in 1993, it actually happens in 94, Israel and Jordan make a peace treaty. That's the second Arab/Muslim country that Israel makes peace with, in addition to Egypt before in the Camp David Accords. And the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, morphs into the Palestine Nationalist Authority, which then morphs into the Palestinian Authority, and that's what we have today, the PA. There was a letter of mutual recognition in which the PLO recognized Israel as a legitimate modern state, and Israel recognized the PLO as a legitimate modern negotiating partner with to work with the Arab and Muslim component of the land of Israel. Jericho, Bethlehem, and the Gaza Strip were all given over, ceded to the PA. And when you go to any of those places today, you automatically know that you have, quote, left Israel proper and you are now under Palestinian authority. There are lots of ways to tell. I'll let you figure it out, and if you haven't, then we can talk later. Hamas called this, in 1993, a treaty between infidels and infidels. Jews and Sadat and his more secular approach to Islam in Egypt. All right, in 1995 through the year 2000, we have Oslo II. This is Oslo Chapter 2 or 2.0. Here, 100% of the Gaza Strip, 92% of the West Bank were offered to the Palestinian Authority. Think PLO, right, with a new name. And the Palestinian Authority rejected the offer. Why? Remember the fill-in-the-blank question? What is it that's connecting all of these dots? The talks eventually broke down, and so the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, how do we pronounce his name? Yasser Arafat. He's dead anyway. But here again is Arafat, Bill Clinton, and the current prime minister of Israel at the time, Ehud Barak. So second intifada is launched, and because of all of the restaurant bombings and the bus stop bombings and the bus bombings and what have you, Israel began to build what is called the security fence. And this is the reason why they are accused, one of the reasons they're accused of being an apartheid state and that kind of thing. Apartheid would mean that you are being discriminated against because of your family of origin or because of your race. Are you guys aware that there are literally hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens who are both Arab and Muslim? Let me give you one example. You've heard of a little city called Nazareth, right? I think you're related spiritually to somebody who grew up there. Pause for response. There is none. We move on. Okay, so Jesus grows up in Nazareth. 2,000 years later, Nazareth has moved in about one generation from being 90% Christian and 10% Muslim to 90%, 65% Muslim and the other percent Christian. But all of these, both Muslims and Christians, they're all Arabs and they're all Israeli citizens to the tune of 220,000 just in one city. 220,000 non-Jewish citizens of the land of Israel. That doesn't really sound like apartheid to me. When there are Arabs who live in East Jerusalem, run businesses, many of them very lucrative businesses, many of them independently wealthy, are able to send their children to places like Oxford to study in England, or to Cambridge, to Harvard, etc. These people are not poor, and they are also not being discriminated against. So the term apartheid probably, all things considered, inappropriately applied to the modern state of Israel. That's just an aside. It's just a little parenthetical remark there. But what you're seeing is all of this is the area of Jerusalem. This is just Jerusalem. And this is a part of the security fence. It's actually a wall at that point. Other places, it's just circled barbed wire. It's not even a standing fence with posts and stuff. So Benjamin Netanyahu was asked about the fence, and he said, look, you can say what you want to about the security fence, but I've just got one statement to make. It worked. The bombing stopped. The terror attacks were over. And Israel has lived in relative peace all the way up to the current situation. So the security fence. In 2005, even though Israel had taken control of the Gaza Strip back during the 1967 war and retained it in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, the Gaza Strip was abandoned by Israel. They withdrew their military, bulldozed the bases, and they, listen to this, forcibly evacuated 9,000 plus Jewish citizens of the nation of Israel from the Gaza Strip, and bulldozed 25 Israeli towns inside the Gaza Strip. At that point, Israel said, you guys can have it. It's yours. We turned it over, or tried to turn it over in Oslo. Now that you wouldn't take it at Oslo too, we're going to make you have it. So they say, you govern yourselves. Palestinian Authority, they're your people, you deal with it. Well, this is 2005. The way is paved by that decision to withdraw from Gaza, both militarily as well as settlements of civilians. And this paved the way to the modern situation with the war with Gaza, war with Hamas in Gaza. In 2007, a splinter group of the Muslim Brotherhood called Hamas, you've all heard of them now, right? A splinter group of the Muslim Brotherhood. They took over Egypt, by the way, in 2005, 2006, and within a year, they were kicked out by the military because they had been burning churches, persecuting Christians, imprisoning Christians, martyring some Christians, and the military had to step in Egypt. Well, this faction of the Muslim Brotherhood that we call Hamas, that they call themselves Hamas today, took over the Gaza Strip. They were supposedly elected into office, and as soon as they did, they commenced a bloody purge of Fatah, the major Yasser Arafat organization that is a big chunk of the PLO, then PNA, then PA. You following all that? The modern the Palestinian quote-unquote leadership. And so I have seen videos personally of Hamas jihadis standing behind PA officials and soldiers, Fatah people, Yasser Arafat's people, who are being made to kneel with their hands behind them, tied behind them, and they execute them by a machine gun. And then a soldier is responsible for going to every one of them and shooting them in the back of the head to make sure with a pistol. This is the way that Hamas was born, guys. They're doing this to their own Arab and Muslim brothers because they were a part of a different political party. Okay, no elections have been held since then. I can understand why. Okay, Israeli wars since that time with Hamas. Hamas takes over in 2007. It doesn't even take them a year before they're in a shooting war with Israel, 2007, 2008, and 2009. That's the first war with Hamas. The second war is in 2012. The third war is in 2014. Are you getting a picture of this? It's every 2 or 3 years that these guys have rearmed, smuggled enough money and enough armaments in from Iran to start another war, and they're back at Israel's throat again. Then again in 2021, and then you get another couple of 3 years, and we're back at 2023. So, is this a one-off with Hamas? Survey says no. Is this business as usual for Hamas? Yes. All right, so Israel is at a point now where they're seeing this progression. They're looking at the same dates that you are, even more closely than we are, lots more detail. Guys sitting around with maps and military leaders and what have you giving input, and satellite photographs and all kinds of data that they're getting. And they're recognizing this: if we let the snake get away this time, what will happen in 2025 or 2026? Gaza war number 6. Israel-Hamas war number 6. Is that what we want to subject our 18 and 19-year-olds to? These are the foot soldiers primarily that are fighting in the streets of Gaza City right now as we speak. Is 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20 years old. Mandatory military service for young men of those ages and 2 years of service for young women. And then there's reserve duty all the way up until you get to, I think, like age 45 or something like that. Keeps getting lower and lower because Israel has a Jewish population now of over 9 million. When we lived there, it was 2.5 million. So what do you do then with the Israel versus Hamas situation? I think that one of the things, we talked about advocating, we talked about standing up this morning, right? Rescue the needy, deliver those from the hands of the wicked, right? I think one of the things that we can do is we can advocate in whatever way that we can, whether that's at our bridge club, our book club, whether that's calling a state senator or a U.S. senator or whatever, and advocating, let's keep our boot off of Israel's neck and let Israel take care of this problem. Hopefully, I'm just an optimist by heart. You're not? Okay, well then you probably lived a lot of life if you're not the eternal optimist. I'm optimistic. Maybe it will be more like 5 or 10 or maybe even 15 years before the next Gaza war instead of the next 2 or 3. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd like to see this progression altered radically. So I would encourage you to read from the material that you'll find at standbyus.com. In their descriptions of what is going on, what are the rules of engagement that these young Israeli soldiers are having to abide by as they go house to house, and they're losing comrades in the process because they don't want to carpet bomb the rest of the Gaza Strip. And become conversant in those things so that then you are able to share with friends, family, the people that you come in contact with that want to dialogue on this from the perspective of the facts rather than I think, I believe, I feel, I hope, I want. It's a whole different thing. Okay. So now the time has come for us to fill in the blank. Are you ready? It's like I said this morning, I'm a professor, so I'm legally allowed to do these things, these little pop quizzes. Have you filled in your blank yet? What is the reason that Arabs do not want peace, except a peace that will give them control of the entire land? They're not interested in a two-state solution. You know who's interested in two-state solution? Westerners and people who don't have a stake in the game. And Israelis who think, some of them, who think that this might actually work. But you've got to have partners to make peace. And so there is, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint here to fill in the blank. There is a doctrine in Islam. You know, Christians aren't the only ones with doctrines. The doctrine of the Trinity, the doctrine of the inspiration of Scripture, or the deity, the godness of the God nature of Jesus in the flesh. The second coming, that kind of thing. We have doctrines. Other religious groups have doctrines as well. One of the doctrines of Islam is called Dar al-Islam. If you want to, you can write it down. I'm going to spell it out for you. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody grabbing a pen. Okay, one pen. Okay, D-A-R, next word, al, it means of in Arabic. And then Islam, I-S-L-A-M. Dar al-Islam, it means the house of Islam or the house of peace. But it basically is a title given to a doctrine that says any land in the world that has ever come, ever in history, ever come under Islamic rule can never be legitimately ruled by anybody else. And no one other than a Muslim ruler is allowed to rule over Muslims in that part of the world. So Israel, once upon a time, and we go back to this Ottoman map. Do you remember the Ottoman map? It included what we call the modern state of Israel. It was under Islamic rule. So according to the doctrine of Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam or the house of peace, is supposed to be, Israel is never supposed to be under the rule of an infidel, a non-Muslim, and Muslims living within the land of Israel are never supposed to be under the rule of anyone other than a fellow Muslim. So do you see the reason why it is that starting in the 1920s, going all the way through the 1930s and the 1940s, going all the way up through Oslo I and Oslo II, there is this underlying doctrine that is pushed by the imams, the Islamic pastors, the mullahs of Iran, etc., that says this would be a renunciation of everything that makes us Muslim to accept a non-Islamic ruler in that part of the country and to accept the fact that there are Muslims living in that country who are under the rule of a non-Muslim person in military and political positions. So, what does this say to us for the future? Hamas cannot stop being Hamas because it is a cardinal doctrine. It defines them as a people. They're not able, they would be like committing apostasy. They would be beyond backsliding. They would be renouncing their Islam because they would be renouncing the doctrine of Dar al-Islam if they accept rule in any part of the land of Israel. They don't want the Gaza Strip. Make no mistake about it. Hamas does not want the Gaza Strip. Hamas wants the whole shooting match. And that's all that they will settle for because of the doctrine of, what was it that you just wrote down? Dar al-Islam. Dar al-Islam. It goes back to a Quranic edition called a Hadith, H-A-D-I-T. For the future, do you expect a peaceful Middle East? Why is that? Because of Dar al-Islam. It's not because of Hamas. It's not because of the mullahs of Iran. It's because of this underlying thing, this reality within the faith of Islam, that if you accept the tradition and you live by it, you cannot renounce the belief in the principle of Dar al-Islam. There has to be Islamic rule over all territories that were ever in history ruled by an Islamic ruler. That includes that entire map of the Ottoman Empire.
Can you also say that's kind of a spiritual fight because of being a non-Christian and the other demons?
Okay, so
Let's wait on the questions till we can pass the microphone.
okay, so the question about motive is, and Hamas has said this, the highest leadership at the highest levels has said, this is not a battle about politics. This is not a battle about economics. This is not a battle about the military. This is a battle of faith. This is a battle of religions. So the other side of the table has admitted as much, that this is not about faith. This is not about politics or money, economics, etc. This is a battle about religion, about faith. So I wanted to point out one last thing, and then I'm going to turn it. I'm going to ask Pastor Lowell to MC our Q&A session, and that is, you hear a whole lot about settlements in the West Bank. So I just wanted to point out to you that within the West Bank, and these are old numbers, there are at least 670,000 settlers. And they live in more than 100, and these are not settlements. When we hear settler, we think about Daniel Boone, and we think about people who walk around with machine guns. These guys are diamond cutters. They're bankers. They're CEOs of large corporations and stuff. And these are modern cities that are, just incredibly well built, and they have traffic jams. And not of wagon trains. These are real modern cities with real modern people, and they're not knuckle-dragging throwbacks. Jewish settlers that are living and raising children and prospering in their businesses and what have you in the West Bank. Modern Israelis won't even use the term West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria. Why is that? Because those are the biblical names. West Bank, that's just something the Jordanians created for the fun of it.